will fall somewhere around Halloween. I think last year it was like the Sunday right after Halloween, so it's fun because it's about a demon-possessed man in the tombs, right? So it gets read again, this version in Matthew, and this is the shorter version of this one. If you remember the whole version, the guy sits down. It's like this guy is demon-possessed, and they chain him up. Sort of like they keep trying to chain him up in places, and the guy keeps breaking out, and then he basically lives in the cemetery or among the tombs. And when Jesus heals the man, you know, in the longer version, when the man who's demon possessed approaches Jesus, he says, you know, do not, you know, leave us alone, you know, Son of God, and they're sort of like frightened by Jesus when he comes near the cemetery. And they say, you know, he asks what their name is, and they say Legion because we're many, right? Like a legion is a reference to sort of like a platoon or a battalion. It's like it's a military reference of the size of a military unit, and a legion is 100 men in the Roman military system. So his name is Legion. So there's like hundreds of demons in this guy. So this guy is severely demon-possessed. And they request, you know, don't cast us into the abyss, right? Just, you know, an interesting reference. But rather, send us into those swine over there, right? And so the story is interesting, right? Because it's these Jewish people, and they're raising what? Pigs, right? So they're not supposed to be raising pigs, but they are. Maybe they're raising it and selling it to other Gentiles in the area, or maybe they're just not very good Jews and they're raising pigs for themselves. Whatever the case, it's not really kosher what they're doing. And so there's a lot of things to focus on in this particular story. But one of the ones that I want to is at the very end of the story, the people who are keeping the herds, they see this sort of miracle happen, right? This man is sitting in his own, not in this version, but in the other version, I believe in Luke, it references that the man was sitting down talking with Jesus in his right mind. Right? That's the wording that's used, like in his right mind. And they see this, and they see the man freed of his sins, and they see the swine all drive themselves over a cliff into the water, and they all drown and die. And they see this, and I mean, if you or I saw this, this would be a pretty dramatic thing, right? We'd be really shaken up by this, probably if we saw something like this as well. And so they were afraid, okay? Their initial reference was fear. When we encounter things that we don't understand or that are overwhelming, usually our response is fear. It's a natural response. And you see this throughout the Bible. When people encounter God or something that's very great, they're afraid. When Moses goes up to receive the Ten Commandments, and Mount Sinai is covered in smoke and lightning, and there's earth is quaking, the people are what? Afraid. When the angel of the Lord appears to people, what? They're what? Afraid. When Jesus appears to a lot of the disciples after the resurrection, he says to them what? Do not be afraid. Why? Because often when people encounter the divine, or they encounter anything that's awesome or beyond their comprehension, they're what? Afraid. Okay? And in our life, we encounter many things that we don't understand, okay? That we can't get our minds around, or that's overwhelming, and our response is to be afraid. What do these men do with their fear? This is what I think is interesting. They ask Jesus to what? I mean, them, and they go and they tell all the townsfolk, and all the townsfolk get really afraid too. And what do they tell Jesus? Leave. Go away. Right? I mean, isn't that interesting that in this case, their fear, they're not like, wow, Jesus, what else can you do for us, right? Or can you heal us? Or you have great power, right? They're so afraid that they cast out the thing that they don't understand, right? That they're in the presence of the divine, in the infinite, and they're afraid, and they want to get rid of that thing. I mean, wow, what a lesson for our lives, right? Because we always, when we read these stories, you and I should try to put ourselves into the different characters, right? And you can learn lessons by inserting yourself into the different people in the Bible stories. And this one, I think we should put ourselves in the place of the townsfolk and the keepers of the herd and think, how do we do the same thing? Because I think we do. Are we letting fear in our own lives, right? Are we letting fear in our own lives push out God from us? And this is how I think it happens, that when we encounter people or situations that we don't understand, right? Things that are different than us, right? That we haven't had experience with before. We're often afraid, right? When big life changes happen, right? In our life, huge transitions in our life happen, we become afraid, right? When we meet new or different people, you know, we can get afraid. And what do we do in that fear? We push people and experiences away. And I think that's a mistake. In this case, the people wanted to run away from the thing that they did not understand, right? But if you want to live a spiritual life, the spiritual life is all about ascending into that cloud of unknowing, right? It's all about entering into the unknown. It's all about experiencing that which you don't understand. That's the spiritual life. And if you don't want to have experiences with things that are beyond you or with things that you don't understand, then the spiritual life is not for you. Because that's what it's about. And even more commonly, in our day-to-day experiences and relationships, we're going to have all kinds of situations with people where we're going to be afraid, right? And we're going to push people and relationships away from us. And that's a mistake too, because it's in people, it's in relationships, right? Especially when we step outside of our comfort zone in relationships and in engaging with people, that we encounter God. That we see the image of God in other people, that we learn something deeper about ourselves. So much of Jesus' ministry was him stepping outside of what would be the comfort zone for most people and engaging with people who were very different or on the margins or outcasts. Who did Jesus consistently spend his time with? Princes? Merchants? Tax collectors, sinners, prostitutes, the poor, women, non-Jews, right? People that would make us uncomfortable, people that we would be afraid around, you know? And maybe a better word than fear is being uncomfortable, right? How much do we flee from being uncomfortable in our lives? But it's in the uncomfortable situations that we grow, that we learn about ourselves, and that we encounter people, and in so doing, find God. And so I think the warning here is that it seems ridiculous to us on the outside looking at these people that they have God in their midst, and they tell him to leave. But we do the same thing in our everyday lives too, by pushing people out, by pushing experiences, by retreating into a comfortable sort of world that we can control and that we know, right? We push God out. Because it's in the frontiers of life that you discover, that you find God, that you sort of meet your own limits, right? Like if you think of like in sports or something like that, right? You know, records are broken, you know, great feats of human achievement are done when people what? They push past the limits of what has usually been done. And in your own moral life, in the building up of your own character, you're only going to grow and etch a more firm character for yourself when you venture out to somebody. Right? I think a great analogy is when the apostles are in the boat and there's the storm, and then they see Jesus, they see what they think is a ghost right off in the distance. And they're really afraid, right? Here's this whole theme of fear again. And they realize it's Jesus. And then, who is the one who has all the kind of bravery in the moment? Peter, right? And what does Peter say? He's like, oh, Lord, tell me to come out to you on the water. I mean, Peter is, he's a really funny character, okay? He's sort of the guy who, when he gets nervous, talks too much, or sort of bites off more than he can chew, right? He does in this case. And he jumps out of the boat, and he walks on the water, right, to Jesus. And then what happens when he starts looking around him and getting afraid? What happens when he's getting afraid? He starts to sink, right? Fear sinks us. And so much of the gospel, what is good news about it, is that Jesus is trying to deliver us from being imprisoned by fear, by allowing fear to keep us in the boat when we could venture out on the water. And so we just need to be looking at our everyday lives of how we are doing that. How are we just staying in the boat, staying in our nice little comfort zone? And I think, especially, I think as Americans or people who live comparatively historically into the world, live pretty affluent lives, it's very easy to sort of build a little fortress around yourself and to live a comfortable, easy life that never challenges you in any way. But the reason you're here and I'm here, and the whole reason we're here about this spiritual life, is to challenge ourselves. That's why we're here, right? To push ourselves, because we need each other. We need a community to do the moral and virtuous things that we wouldn't be able to do on our own. So make sure this week that pay attention. Don't push people and experiences away, because they might just be God in disguise. Lord Jesus Christ.